Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're continuing our conversations around what's going on in Washington and how it impacts people locally. I'm thrilled to be joined today by three people who can speak to some of the proposals in the president's families plan that you heard about in the State of the Union better than I can. Certainly have had more experience in these areas. Chris Young, who's the president of SUNY Orange. Hello, Chris. Thank you for being here, who does such good work at SUNY Orange. Heather Decker from RECAP, who does a lot of work in early childhood development and with young children and all the issues they're dealing with in the pandemic. And Beth Maliniak, excuse me, who is a kindergarten teacher in Somers, which is a wonderful community I represent in Westchester. And I'm thrilled that you could all be with me today. Thank you. Just to set the stage, I think people know that in response to the pandemic and with the change in the administrations in Washington, there's been a huge focus on these major initiatives you've been hearing about. And first came the rescue plan, and that involved a huge investment in our small businesses with these PPP loans and with the EIDL loans from SBA. 100,000 small businesses, 100,000 people, excuse me, working at 11,000 businesses in my district are benefiting from that. We saw these direct cash payments to families, $1,400 per individual on top of the $600 that had happened before. Real money for people making under $75,000 a year. So a family of four, talking about $5,600 in cash that people have received. There's more than 160 million Americans who've received something like, $300 billion in the last few weeks. So a real shot in the arm to those families. We've seen things like investments in local communities. That's what you hear people say, state and local aid. That's why so many mayors and supervisors and county executives that I represent are so supportive of what's been done in the rescue plan, because that's allows them to provide these services they've been providing, to fund their police and fire departments, to do all the things without raising your property taxes. So that was a rescue plan, a lot of important stuff in there. And then you heard the president talk about a jobs plan, which really was a focus on infrastructure and a broad definition of infrastructure to include lots of things that might not just be roads and bridges, but that are part of our modern economy and that will determine how prosperous and how well we all do. And we're really focused on that. And I'm excited that we could be increasing state Department of Transportation budgets by 40% if we pass the president's infrastructure plan, and a lot of other good stuff. But the third big piece, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is the families plan. And you heard the president talk about this in the State of the Union, if you saw that speech a few nights ago. And there are several major big components to this, and I just want to list them off so people have a shared understanding of what we're talking about. And then I want to ask each of my guests to kind of weigh in about what they've been seeing in the pandemic and how these things might impact their important work. So first, the families plan would provide universal pre-K kindergarten for 2 years for 3 and 4-year-olds all over the country. Now, some communities do this, like in New York City, they've had pre-K programs for the last few years. And most education experts would tell you it's going to make a big difference in outcomes for kids who have more access to high quality pre-K sooner. So that's one of the big proposals. And then on the other end of our traditional public education system, which is usually ends at high school, the president has proposed 2 free years of community college. And because Chris Young runs a really important community college locally, SUNY Orange, I wanted to get her thoughts on that. What would that mean if we made 2 years of community college free for all Americans? It would also lower the cost of college for low and middle income families, particularly at historically Black colleges and universities, what we call HBCUs, tribal colleges and universities, TCUs, and minority serving institutions. But then more broadly for folks who may not go to those kinds of institutions, the Pell Grant Award, which is so important for so many middle class families, which is basically just financial aid from the federal government, would increase that maximum Pell Grant by $1,400 and include more people in it. And then there's also a proposal to have $9 billion invested in strengthening teacher pipelines to address teacher shortages, which I think is a really interesting idea, and to increase the kind of number of teachers generally and kind of who's teaching. And then finally, it would ensure that publicly funded programs are inclusive and high quality and have low student to teacher ratios. So there's a bunch of stuff here that is geared towards education, And that's what I think these guys can talk best about. So Chris, from your perspective, as somebody running, SUNY Orange, you were there before the pandemic, you've kind of lived every day of the pandemic. Tell us what you're seeing, what's going on, and how the president's proposal would impact your work.
Great. Well, thank you, Congressman, for inviting me into this conversation. What a whirlwind year, right? In the past year. So, the students that we have right now at SUNY Orange, we have campuses in Middletown and Newburgh. The students that we have this year, and P.S., they're taking finals right now, so we all have them in mind and root them well right now. The students who are with us, my gosh, what a year they've had, right? Particular grit, particular determination, have gone through this transition along with our faculty and staff who on a dime turned a community college that was very high touch, personal, and went remote truly in a heartbeat. And community colleges pride themselves on their flexibility, innovation, and we did that last March and continue to refine that and perfect that over the course here. What I'm concerned about, Congressman, is the students who are not with us, right? The ones who fell off. So SUNY Orange, like all but a handful of the 1,100 community colleges nationwide over this past year, suffered enrollment loss. And that's not a comment on the quality of what was going on in community colleges this year. It's who do community colleges serve? Students who are part-time, who are working to go to college, historically first-generation students, disproportionate number of first-gen students, minority students, students who have their own children, students who are taking care of their own parents, an amalgam of students who seeking the American dream and need their local community college to be there for them. So that's my worry right now. And what this plan, I am so excited about the things that I see in it, because we know through research and literature that if a student steps out of higher education, they're not likely to come back into it. And if a student doesn't start higher education, they're not likely to ever start it. So the longer we propagate that gap, which is largely financial, for students, we're going to increase an intellectual void here in a very complex time for the United States of America, for our state, and of course for your district, when we need students to access all the things they need to access for individual self-realization and for the good of society, to be able to make the decisions, critique information, and to sustain our communities. So the things that I'm seeing in this plan, I hope get a fair hearing. There's so many details to work out and nuance, but I applaud what I see here. And Congressman, I have lost your sound.
Sorry, thanks, Chris. Oh. What would it mean if every family could send their kid to college to community? I mean, what I hear a lot from middle class families, right, is that community college is becoming such an important option for people because the cost of traditional four-year college is so high in many cases, and it's just a financial decision. And they know that bang for the buck, man, it's great to get 2 years at Dutchess Community College or SUNY Orange. And if you made that free, what would you expect to see? Would you expect to see a lot more people coming to your programs that and for those who don't know, right, I mean, you guys have these great programs that actually really align with employment, right? So that people can, like your nursing program, or people can really get skills that are really in demand, can get a good paying job, can raise a family on it. Yeah. Even if they're only going to complete an associate's degree. Do you think, so what would you expect? Would you expect an enrollment increase? What would you think you'd see?
Yeah, I believe so. And in the state of New York, and most community colleges are comprehensive, right? And there's some confusion, like I think people should go to trade school. In New York, we do both. So a student who wants a baccalaureate degree and go on to master's and more, you can get the first 2 years of that baccalaureate education at a community college, and it transfers beautifully. Sometimes our classes are even more rigorous, so we can demonstrate to another SUNY school, to Marist and so forth, that these are rigorous courses that should transfer on. But you're absolutely right, Congressman, that if a student is saying, I want to get into the workforce with technical skills, nursing's a fine example. After 2 years, you can save a life. Dental hygiene, computer
Right.
networking. These are the courses that SUNY Orange has. Other community colleges like, Rockland has automotive technology, a variety of hands-on, applied, noble, completely complicated high-level things that go beyond the high school diploma. So yes, we should see enrollments increase. And to those that say, students should have skin in the game, student still has to earn those grades. The student still has to demonstrate that they have learned something. They have to make the sacrifice and deferred, earning potential, still has to get to the college, still has to do all the things that they have to do. What we're talking about here, I believe, in these proposals is it's the tuition piece of it. That they're being relieved. The student still has plenty skin in the game to have to do what they need to do to access the education.
Well, so that's interesting. So, but let me get some of these other folks in the conversation. So, Heather, I know you are the Early Childhood Development Director at RECAP. So we're kind of going to the other end of the educational spectrum here, but also some really important proposals around pre-K in the president's proposal. So, tell folks what RECAP is, kind of what the work you do, and tell us what you think some of the stuff would mean for the subjects you work on.
Sure. So RECAP is the Regional Economic Community Action Program. We're the designated community action program for Orange County. We have an umbrella of different programs to support self-sufficiency and, children, adults, those battling with addiction, that need housing. So we provide a lot of social supports to the community and a hand up to those in need. Right now, we are serving 128 Head Start children across 3 centers. They're all 3 to 5 years old, and we have 111 of them on site in our program every day. So the pandemic, has had quite a bit of impact on our operations. I want to recognize the efforts of our teachers and the families over the past year. Their dedication and their work has really been endless. It's been amazing to see how they've gone above and beyond, and those school partnerships just continue to impress us as an organization throughout the year. But despite that, some of our youngest learners are doing school virtually. And if us as adults are struggling with a Zoom meeting, imagine a classroom of 3-year-olds. So it's also really fun and inspiring to watch, but they've missed out on this in-classroom learning time, their services, their speech, OT, PT, and the social aspects of a classroom. Many of our centers are serving fewer children than they were prior to the pandemic. The greatest setback, or the greatest item, has been that loss of in-person learning, social interactions, and we're seeing the impacts in language and literacy development outcomes for our 4-year-old learners. The language modeling and high quality teacher-child interactions that take place in a classroom throughout the day are significantly reduced when we're teaching virtually, or when we're in and out due to exposure, class size limitations, high community spread of COVID, and staff absences. So all of those have been really impactful and created some inconsistency in our program schedule.
Right. Well, and so, the rescue plan that I alluded to up front, is putting $200 million in local schools over the next couple of years. They're getting it up front, but it can be used over a couple of years. And some of us believe that's really important to make up for some of the stuff you were just talking about, kind of at all grade levels. But like in the early childhood thing, I mean, you guys, so a lot of people know about the Head Start program. I think that people understand it's a great program, does great work. You guys administer that, right? So that's really sort of kind of like, your core, one of your core things. Help me understand. So what would 2 years of pre-K mean? Would it be just Head Start for everybody? Would it be, what does that actually mean? So for 3 and 4-year-olds we're talking about, right? What does that mean to a parent out there of a 2-year-old that is going to be different than what they deal with otherwise?
So I think it's it's going to really set children up to be successful into kindergarten. Children that are participating in early childhood programs, such as Head Start and high quality programs, are achieving higher outcomes in cognitive and social emotional measures once they get to kindergarten. They have increased attendance, stronger health outcomes, and are shown to have a significant early childhood education in general is shown to have a significant return on investment. And some studies demonstrate that as high as 13%, especially with vulnerable populations. Every day, our programs help children to make gains in language, literacy, mathematics, social emotional development, cognitive development, motor, and approaches to learning. They're really building their future through play, investigation, discovery. We follow a study-based curriculum, so children are really, developing their own learning, and the teachers are presenting them with opportunities to discover that. So it's very hands-on and very play-based. So these educators are really honing in on individualization and helping children to develop along developmental progressions. It's
And is your idea of pre-K for everybody would mean that you're basically universalizing that would be available to all children and it would become part of the landscape? Is that basically what that proposal would mean? I mean, I think those of us who know what kind of like rich people do with their kids when they've got like, like the kinds of concerns they have around the learning strategies they need or their ability to kind of compete in school. This is what they do, right? I mean, they get them these early childhood programs. They kind of surround them with people who are following a curriculum that is addressing those kind of different types of things. All the things you talk about, like even the occupational therapy stuff, I know for one of my children, I mean, is really essential. Like this is basically because there's sort of physical ways they interact with things that are different for them. There's sort of executive functioning issues. There's all sorts of things that kids bring to the classroom. And is the point that you would essentially extend this to everybody, that they would, and is it, I mean, it sounds revolutionary in the way that universal kindergarten or universal, even public school would be. I mean, when I hear experts talk about this, they speak in pretty excited terms about what universal pre-K would mean.
I would hope that the high quality of those services that we see for the families who can really afford to invest in their children's first years could be universal. We have so much research on high quality teacher-child interactions, research-based curriculum, family engagement, health and wellness, that if those concepts and high quality education were universal for all 3 and 4-year-olds, we would see drastic outcomes and great increases in the health and well-being of our children and their ability to be ready when they enter kindergarten.
All right, so let's go to the source. So that brings us to you, Beth. So Beth, you teach kindergarten in Somers. I got that right. And so you hear us talking about this stuff. Tell us about what kindergarten's been like over the last 12 months. God bless you and everybody who's been doing that. It must have been so challenging. And I know we're coming out of the pandemic, thank God. And particularly with younger kids, it looks like we can have a kind of a quote unquote normal school year coming up at least. What do you think about all this stuff? Give us your thoughts as you listen to this conversation.
Well, starting back March, it was crazy for us. I have to say, having five-year-olds at home and learning remotely was very challenging, and not being able to prepare for it. It was okay. One day we're in, the next day we're home. So it was quite a challenge. So from June, we kind of, the teachers kind of, I have to say, I work with wonderful people, and we just kind of pulled together and did our best. It was kind of like survival mode. Parents were great. It fell a lot fell on the parents' shoulders, to get the children ready, to get them prepared and have their materials. And so there was a lot of teamwork. And that's what I think what school is. I think school is not just the teachers doing the work or the parents. I think it's a lot of give and taking back and forth and working together. This year, I have to say in Somers, we've been very fortunate. Our school board has been very dedicated, and our students have been supporting us. So our K through 6th grade, the children have been in every day of school, unless there's been a quarantine for exposure. Where I have 20 students, but I have 10 in one classroom. and 10 across the hall. And we're back and forth with teaching assistants. So I feel very fortunate to have the children in front of me because the remote learning isn't ideal for the younger students. But even with them, being in front of me, there's a lot of challenges. They have to stay 6 feet apart. They have to wear their masks. So I feel like a lot of what we normally do, we do a lot of cooperative play, a lot of cooperative learning and activities. You can't do them this year, or they have to be rethought. So even though we're in school this year, it's very different than in the past. When you're talking about the pre-K, that's very exciting for us to hear as a kindergarten teacher. If we can have kids coming to school with everyone having more of a similar experience, instead of some kids going to preschool and some kids not going to preschool, you definitely can see differences with students.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. So when you have kids in the same classroom now in kindergarten, some have had these pre-K programs and some haven't. What kind of, how do you tell the difference?
Well, even just socially, the children that are able to play together better and communicate and take turns. Taking turns is a big thing. If children are in a school setting, they're used to not being that immediate gratification and being called on all the time and have their thoughts answered at every moment. So you definitely can see that they know how to play. They know how to figure out problems better. Because they're in a situation where they're with a group of kids and problems, social problems arise all the time. So they have to be able to figure it out and maneuver themselves in those situations. Where when you're at home and you're with just mom or your siblings, things are different. We know that things are different at home. So when they're in a preschool and they have those experiences, we see the difference when they come into kindergarten, whether they can navigate those experiences.
Well, that's very interesting, and of course makes perfect sense. I'm sitting here thinking we could use some pre-K programs for members of Congress, because it'd be great if some of those qualities could exist in our national government. But that's a larger conversation. But listen, so I want to give the press a chance to ask questions, but it's really helpful for me to hear from you guys kind of how this shows up. I think it's exciting for a lot of us. I think there are, as Chris points out, a lot of questions to answer. We're working through the legislative process now. A lot of it will happen at the agency level, but the goals are exciting. And I think that the idea that to prepare our children and to prepare our country for all the opportunities in the 21st century, then we've really got to grow and evolve how we think about public education. And this has happened throughout our history, right? I mean, public education itself in the early days was kind of a revolutionary idea. And then, of course, expanding it to include 4 years of high school. And we know now that so many kids get out of high school without the ability to have a skill, to be employed, or even maybe to go on to higher education. And I think that the answers are all around us in the things that are already working. And I think that if we can provide better pathways for people, I think we could have some great outcomes. I mean, I know that the pandemic has really accelerated some of these things. I see it in my own kids' high school, where a lot of kids are deciding to delay going to college because they just don't feel that the last year has kind of finished them off in the way that they feel they need. And so they're looking at different options like community college, like other things that they think might be a good way to proceed. But those things have been there all along, and they provide such important, even just for economic reasons, for so many families to get a 4-year education for their kid in college, or just to get a skill to be employed. But well, listen, let's unless you guys want to jump in with more, I'm going to let the press ask some questions and be respectful of everybody's time. I know we got a late start. Libby, who's with us still, who's our MC. Libby, you want to open it up to the press?
Yes, thank you again all for your patience. If you have a question for our attendees, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, Hank, you are allowed to unmute yourself.
Hello, Hank.
Unmute. Good morning.
Hi, Hank.
Hi. An observation. I've got an almost 6-year-old grandson in kindergarten, and to see this young man home with his Chromebook, whizzing through it and doing all the activities with the teacher, it was amazing. It was fantastic to see this little young man do his thing and do it so well. But as as Beth said, the lack of socialization was obvious. So hopefully, as more and more people get vaccinated, we can get back to almost normal.
Well, thanks, Hank. I mean, we're absolutely, charging through vaccination. We're encouraging everybody to continue to get vaccinated. We are seeing really encouraging signs already, 50% decreases in the positivity rate in the 4 counties I represent over the last 14 days. That's really significant, and it's a direct result of people getting vaccinated. So everybody has that available to them now. They should do it. In fact, I know there's that great site at right SUNY Orange's Middletown campus, but their sites are everywhere now, and you can get vaccinated. So that's so important. And so yeah, tell me about that, guys. I mean, so the socialization piece, right? I mean, I think all of us who've been through school know kind of what happens in the classroom and then what happens everywhere else, whether you're talking about the sports field or the hallways or in those conversations with a teacher or a guidance counselor, in between classes. That's the stuff, isn't it? I mean, how much are we missing? And will these ideas help any of that? Who wants to take that?
I can talk to that because right now in our school, we have the school counselor building in lessons to work with the kindergartners. And we're talking about how to introduce yourself, that eye contact, about looking at one another, even simple things like playing games on the playground. What games can they play? All of these things have changed this year with COVID and the 6 feet distance and not staying, keeping their distance from one another. So, and for the younger kids, they need to be taught. They don't just always absorb all those things that they see us doing as adults, or we hope that most of us adults are doing. And they need to be taught, how you introduce, how do you say to someone, no, I don't want to really play right now. So we're really lucky that we have school counselors, and the district is willing to, invest in those important skills and give us a time with the counselors to specifically teach these lessons. And I think that needs to be done, not just in kindergarten, but in all grades. I'm sure even up to the high school. We need to stop and we need to go back to these simple skills that then we need to focus on and work on with the kids.
Yeah, Chris, so in your work, I'm thinking of your nursing program, you're teaching nursing. It's a little hard to do remotely, isn't it? I mean, how do you, I mean, I've seen that beautiful center you have the sort of anatomically correct, sort of right dummies that they practice on, they do all this sort of stuff that is really hands-on and very practical and really important to getting a great job. If that's what you want to do, right? How are you guys doing that remotely?
Yeah. So for the past year, the instructional activities that were brought back to campus were the ones that the faculty said, this can't go remote, right? So to your point, exactly, nursing was on campus. A lot of health professions, science classes, art classes were brought very safely back to campus with all of the social distancing and testing protocols. So we had it was a much quieter campus, but a limited number of students on campus. But the preponderance of our students were operating remotely. So I have to acknowledge the very creative faculty and especially student services who had to get at that social piece. And how do you create spaces for students to interact outside of class, in class, to capture that other part? Not just to be social, but learning. You just don't learn in those 50 minutes when you're in a class, right? How do you help students create those spaces? There's a great line in the community college world, which is students don't do optional. You have to guide them to these additional learning experiences. So to help guide them to this, and one of my favorite groups always, but particularly this year, was it's called BOA, the Board of Activities. So it's in the college world, it's a parallel to student senate. They are entrusted with the student fees to create these more social extracurricular activities for students. They fund student clubs, and man, they knocked it out of the park with creating both virtual and safe ways for students to come. Like, we did a lot of movie drive-ins so students could stay in their cars but be with each other in parking lots to do that. So as we head into the fall, we're getting more students on campus for those who want to are ready to emotionally, and they feel safe coming back to campus, but we'll also have a great selection of courses that will stay remote. And in both cases, surrounding that with all of the tutoring, the advising, all of the things that you would expect in both spheres to support learners. So it's
Awesome.
as we
Well,
were.
I want to make sure if there are more questions from the press,
Yep.
we're letting them
Beg
in.
your pardon.
But, no, but I'm also interested in that, and I have questions. But Libby, are there press questions that we want to get in?
Does anyone else have a question? Please raise your hand and I will unmute, allow you to unmute yourself.
And so, Chris, while we're doing that, if we make community college free for 2 years, what is the difference between somebody with 2 years of community college and a high school degree? Like, what would it just, like, it's kind of a hard question, I guess, but you know what I mean? But like, what would that mean if everybody had that versus just high school?
Oh, what a dream, right? So from the more technical side of it, right? So the nursing, the cybersecurity, imagine, 2 years of full-time study in these technical fields, and the job we can attract, the technical leaps that you can make as a society, right? It's hard to even articulate.
Well, I hear about it all the time from employers, right?
Well, right. What we can
Who's trained
support,
workers, yeah.
what we can support as a nation, in terms of the technologies that we can produce, support, maintain, repair, should push it so much further, so much rapidly, as a society. And then in terms of opening the door to, we talked to my colleagues here on the screen, that we know how capable our students are at age 3 and 5 and 7 who can get baccalaureate degrees and beyond. And it's the stuff that gets in the way. It's the garbage that gets in the way about lack of resources or encouragement or what's happening. So imagine you open that door, you get a taste of college, you get a taste of success, and then you say, go to New Paltz, go to Purchase, go to Marist, go to Mount St. Mary, get that baccalaureate degree. And then that same effect now of leading and designing those advanced technologies and international understandings and understanding other cultures and peace and all of this good stuff in our universe. Like the impact on society is going to be profound. I believe deeply that, at least 2/3 of our society, at least, is capable of college, and it's the other garbage of life that gets in the way, that keeps people out of higher education.
And just money, it's expensive. Hey, Heather, so here's my question for you. So yeah, same question in a way, right? If we, what should we expect if every kid had a couple years of pre-K, and not just that, and feel free to jump in here, Beth, too, but I know, like, my mom had 6 kids, right? 6 of us. My sister had a developmental disability, required a lot of care. My five boys, right? She said, I'm the youngest. When that school bus went down the road and I finally was in school, it was the first time, in 30 years that she had any time, right? And so what does it also mean to families, right? To if you're working and you've got young children and you now have pre-K programs available, there's a bigger effect than just on the kids, right? As profound as that would be. So I guess 2 questions. What happens with the kids if everybody gets pre-K? And then what happens to these to working families out there who now have 3 and 4-year-olds with this kind of option?
So to both parts of the question, we serve both the children and the families. So when families come to Head Start, it's a dual generational model. The children are enrolled in the program and the families are receiving family services. They're assigned a family advocate. They're establishing goals and figuring out what resources they need to obtain self-sufficiency. That could be obtaining a job with a living wage. It could be that they want to move or own their own home, or whatever goals they're working toward. So we're already really integrated in helping the families to accomplish those pieces. I think one of the biggest things is that early childhood programs can really counteract those impacts of trauma and toxic stress. And kind of like Chris said, by the time they're in college, that's the stuff that's getting in the way. So if we can help to build their resilience now, we're helping families to build protective factors by creating parent-child bonds, connections to other families and other positive, nurturing adults in children's lives, social emotional support for the children. Just like Beth said, they need that social emotional interaction. They need to know how to interact with other children, and they get that in this safe, supportive environment of their classroom. And particularly promoting the parent's role as the child's first teacher. So all of those things promote that resilience that children need to be successful in kindergarten, the next 12 years, and then hopefully when they're on Chris's doorstep as college students. We start that conversation with our parents at orientation. We say, who would love to have a scholarship for their child when they graduate from high school? And of course, every parent's raising their hands. We say, well, this is your first scholarship. You're coming to Head Start. This is that opportunity to lay the foundation for your child, and to partner with us. So we're giving families that hope, that vision for the future, helping them to build resilience for their children and for themselves, so they can accomplish the goals. And once the children are enrolled in Head Start, they can go on to, helping to identify what they want next for their family, and what's right for their family at that time, whether it's work or, taking care of children at home, increasing the parent-child relationship with younger children, things like that.
Beth, you want to get in here? And
I'm thinking back of when my children were little, actually, because they're grown up now, but when they were younger, like childcare is expensive, daycare is expensive, and I was fortunate where we could afford it. And I live in Somers as well, and I feel fortunate that I was able to do that. And if parents have that availability to have childcare or preschool free, it really frees up a lot of stress on their part. And they're obviously still going to be teaching their children. They're still going to be reading books to the children, doing all those things, but a majority is going to be, done at the school. And then they're going to carry over and do things at home. And then we continue that connection in kindergarten. Kindergarten is just a big extension to the pre-K. We're going to continue the learning and continue the bonds with the family. Again, it takes all of us to work together. It's not going to be just the school and just the family, but I think starting that working relationship when they were younger and supporting them. I know, Heather, you were saying about, the services, giving them, those early prevention services are so important. So if a child needs occupational therapy for their fine motor, or they need speech and language, and starting that earlier, great if you could start it in kindergarten, but if they could start it earlier. And then what happens a lot is the kindergarten teachers often talk to the preschools. So we're kind of getting a heads up before they even start with us. Oh, look for that. They might need this, or they might need that, or giving us this. We found that this intervention works great for this child. So I think all of those bonds, all of us working together is just going to make it better for the children and make it better for everybody. And it's going to be a win-win situation.
Well, I'm excited about this, and I think we're going to have a real chance to get a lot of it going. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If there aren't more questions from the press, I want to thank my guests, Chris Young, from the Orange, Heather Decker from Recap, and Beth Maliniak, who teaches kindergarten. Get that right? Who teaches kindergarten in Somers. You guys are great. Thank you for the work you do, and for helping me understand kind of how this stuff shows up locally. I always find it useful, and hope everybody is going to have a easier year coming up than the one we just had. I think that's pretty guaranteed. Hopefully, get vaccinated, everybody. It's safe. It'll save your life, and it'll get these guys all our kids back in the classroom full time, and everybody learning the way we should. So, and doing everything else. So, thank you all very much. Appreciate your help today. All right, guys.
Thank you.
See you later.